Well, I think we're just about at 1:30, so why don't we get started? Matt, are you ready to go?
I'm ready if you are.
I am. I'll tee us up here. So, hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I am Becky Beaulieu, NEMA board member and director of the Florence Griswold Museum. I am here with my colleague, Matt Strekel, who is the Director of Development at the Florence Griswold Museum. And this session is entitled Fundraising is a Team Sport, Setting Gift Policies and Procedures that Strengthen Your Institution from the Inside Out and Make Your ED Happy. Woohoo! So, Matt, if you want to pull up the show and the background slide.
I think we're there.
Are you there? Okay. So I'll just get us started here. So for those of you who I have not had a chance to meet yet, and I wish I could see all of your faces, my name is Becky again. I'm director of the Flow Grizz, which is in Old Lyme, Connecticut. Matt made this PowerPoint, would never describe myself as an expert at anything, but am keenly interested in endowments and museum finance. And you may have seen some of my sessions that are on finance and budget building. I have written extensively on finance for all of us that are trying to figure out our way around it. But that does not mean that I have an extensive background in development. So it's been really fun for me to work with Matt as he's joined us at the Flow Grizz and establishing some great protocols there. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Matt Strekel. I'm the Director of Development here at the Florence Griswold Museum. Not only is this my first time presenting at NEMA, but this is my first time presenting digitally outside of our regular Zoom and GoToMeetings. So we're going to give this a go and have some fun and geek out about fundraising numbers. So I grew up in Old Lyme. It's a pleasure to be at a hometown museum in a place that I love dearly. I am also not an expert. I like to pretend to be sometimes in fundraising, but I bring a different perspective to the fundraising world at museums in that most of my fundraising background actually is in educational institutions in secondary ed and higher education. So that's a lot of fun for me to bring some of what I know there and apply it to a different kind of setting. You know, I really enjoy some of the nuts and bolts and the 90% of fundraising that's backroom planning, legwork, and the 10% that everybody thinks we all do, which is schmoozing and lunches and dinner and drinks, is really just the gravy and icing on top. So with that, let's give you guys a little bit about who we are as an institution. And Becky, I'll turn it back to you if you want to talk a little bit about our history and where we come from.
Sure. So just to give you all a little bit of context for the size of our organization, and we'll really try today to gear this towards organizations that may be functioning on a much smaller business, but also providing some tools and resources that resonate with those larger. But just for a little bit of context for you, as I said, we're based in Old Lyme, Connecticut. We're in southeastern Connecticut. We function on a budget usually between $2.5 and $3 million, depending on our activities in any given year. As you can see here, we've broken this down so you understand exactly how much is coming through the contributed streams, which is about 44%. We have visitor services at 16% and education and outreach at 6%. So together that's some of our earned revenue. And then our investments and our institutional funds are about a third year to year. The 2020 visitor attendance probably looks a little bit like yours right now. We welcome just under 4,500 people this year. We average usually about 30,000 exhibition attendees. And then when you factor in our educational programs, we usually have about 50,000 people on site. So we've had a number of visitors who have transitioned from on-site activity with us to virtual activity. So you're able to see that, which is fascinating. Just a little bit about our background here. We were originally an artist colony at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1914, we began institutionalizing when Miss Florence Griswold, sold a parcel of land to Lyme Art Association to sell and showcase the works of the artist colony. And then 1937, Miss Florence passes away. And over the years, the land is parceled out and then reformed as part of the Florence Griswold Museum. We have been part of this current iteration since the mid-70s. We expanded in the early 2000s. Our focus is on 18th century to 20th century American art, and particularly that of Connecticut. And Matt, I fear I stole some of your thunder in terms of the budget construction, but I'm sure you'd love to go into more detail on our modest numbers for 2020.
Well, I think, one of the interesting, you covered it, Becky, but one of the really interesting pieces to note there is that in working with your ED and in sort of looking at the needs of the institution, Becky and I really, gave some hard thought to that last statistic there, which is the 5,019 unique visitors that came in through virtual tours. 2,000 alone came through in April. And we thought about sponsorship, and we thought about maybe monetizing that and trying to put it behind a paywall. And, we really came down on the side of more flies with honey than vinegar, and wanting to make sure that we were cultivating and stewarding folks as best we possibly could. And what we've seen is that gratefully, rather than having approached businesses or individuals early on for sponsoring those virtual pieces, because they were able to take advantage of them virtually from home during the closure period in Connecticut during the pandemic, they've come back and they've increased their giving, or they've increased their sponsorship level. So allowing that to serve as a cultivation and stewardship piece paved the way for a little bit more later on. So you didn't steal my thunder, you're setting me up.
All right.
So go ahead.
So Matt's really going to be taking the lead role in this conversation, but I do just want to preface all of his great insights with sharing that, the relationship between the ED and the DoD is arguably the most important. You could say that about every relationship at the museum, of course, but when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of providing support for your programs and your operations, there's nothing more of a vital heartbeat than that. I would just offer that the idea of setting priorities and making sure that that relationship is clear and coherent is absolutely not just necessary in terms of functioning, but absolutely a requirement of the strong communication and expedience with which you may need to be working sometimes. So planning is very different from project execution and evaluation. And so what I think is really important that Matt's helped us with at the Flow Grizz is how important it is to establish expectations for projects, timelines, and budgets. And that has been a conversation in which he's been a fundamental and essential component. Now, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Becky. So, I think that there's argument to be made, as Becky mentioned, that the ED has to have a strong relationship with everybody who's a director, but really, I'm biased, but as the DoD, I think our relationship has to be the strongest. And my justification for that is that not only does development bring in contributed revenue, but it also manages so many of the external relationships that are vital to the health and the growth of the institution. And so I think that making sure that there are healthy lines of communications that are open between the ED and DoD at all times is really important. But that's not to take anything away from the relationship with the CFO. Our CFO, Fred, is a very pivotal piece, an integral piece in identifying our funding priorities. He helps us set a budget, and the way that we've begun to operate and how I came in and sort of took a different view at it was, that to make sure that we weren't just raising annual fund dollars and restricted gift dollars and endowment dollars, but that we were trying to alleviate as much of the operating budget as possible through fundraising efforts, so that when we were raising money for the endowment fund or the acquisitions fund, that we had an actual budget number that tied out to that, that gave us a goal. And that may seem simple and it may seem obvious, but it's something that was pretty critical for us to begin doing here at our institution. So we really looked at what relief can development bring to the budget and what priorities we can set together as an institution 18 to 24 months in advance, so that we know what's coming up, that we can begin to plan for funding, begin mini campaigns, put into our marketing and communications plan. If you're looking at a bricks and mortar project or any sort of renovations, have you considered looking at and breaking it down at a cost per square foot when offering a naming opportunity? In the past, I've found it successful that naming opportunities go at or offered at a 70% value of the cost per square foot for the total project. That may work for us. It may be different for your institution, but thinking about things in those strategic sort of ways, so that there's applicable dollars to sort of these more general concepts is what we were going for. And then it's really important for us to know, especially for Becky and I to know, who's managing and holding and cultivating your most sensitive and impactful relationships. And that goes beyond the board, although that's very important. We each have a very good relationship with our board president. But, who's checking in with just your regular term board members, your honorary trustees, your charter trustees, and your high-end donors that you're wanting to cultivate and steward outside of asking for money and outside of engagement with programs and activities at the museum. Are you building relationships that are meaningful with the institution? And I think that's one of the most important things to come across, is that as fundraisers, we are, and I think everybody who works at any institution, any nonprofit, has their fundraising cap on it at some point, is that you're the vessel by which somebody manages and keeps a relationship with the institution. When you're gone, how healthy is that person's relationship with your museum after you've left? And I think that's a sign of success. So when we talk about setting priorities and budgeting 18 to 24 months out in advance, managing those relationships is a crucial and integral part of that, because hopefully you're still there, but you may not be. You may be, taking advantage of another opportunity somewhere. So what are some of the keys for success that are personal to us, that Becky and I have found that really work for us? First, we have weekly meetings every Tuesday. It's a day that works for us to discuss our progress and priorities. We also take the time at the beginning of the year, as best we can, to get all of our meetings set, put as much of a communications calendar together, as much as an annual fund solicitation calendar together, so that Becky can participate, that your ED can participate actively in your fundraising process with you as you move along. And also your development committee. We want to make sure that you're empowering members of your board and the development committee to be a part of what you're planning for. And lastly, really the nuts and bolts that get me excited on a very nerdy level are the metrics, because the numbers don't lie, and you can make the numbers your friends and use them to your advantage. But they also motivate me. If I'm terribly behind and I've got to go into Becky and show a report where I'm just honest and we're behind, it motivates me and it lights a fire. So it's said that development work is half head and half heart, and the metrics and the numbers take the heart out of it and allow you to really focus on what's important. Lastly, it's different what you should be tracking at your institution versus what we may track. I think they're the basics, right? You want to be tracking membership rates and renewal rates and annual fund participation from membership and who's contributing and those sorts of things. But don't be afraid to, it doesn't have to stay consistent year over year. As much as you want to try and you feel free, like you can play a little bit within your numbers to find the metrics and the measurements and the standards that are best for you. Becky, did you want to jump in anything on anything about our keys for success or anything that makes you excited about this?
Well, I would say that something that's so important for me is setting up a routine of communication. As Matt was saying, we do weekly meetings. We usually end up talking, I probably daily, about other things. But don't assume that because you're in regular contact, that's the same thing as having a set meeting schedule. I think this applies to so many different elements of our work, but you don't need to be a part of a massively large staff structure to lose sight of those constant topics that you want to be playing with. And as Matt said, our conversation shifts week to week as we see what we need to be responding to that's happening on site. He will nudge me about things. I will be able to ask him for information that I need. So I would offer that it took us a little while too. Like, don't expect this to perfectly blossom into a perfectly paced routine for you. Find what works for you both. I am horrendously way too busy at all times. Matt is obsessively thinking about our fundraising goals at all times. Sometimes this can conflict in terms of my availability and Matt's eagerness to move things forward. But we have found that we can say to each other, okay, we really need to make the space for this, or we need to move this forward. And it's important to be honest and to find something that actually is really effectual for you both.
So we thank you, Becky, and we talk about metrics. So we're going to dive into a little bit of the metrics that we use here at the museum that are specific for us. Again, take what you want, leave what doesn't work for you, mold it, meld it, copy and steal. Let's see what works for you guys. But we're going to give you a few examples of some stuff that we do here. So lots of numbers, lots of graphs, but this is a really great graph that we use, that Becky and I go over, and that we use for our reporting out to the development committee of our board. So you'll see that on the left-hand side, you've got the funds that we've identified, some of which are carried on the budget, and some of which are not. You'll see that obviously we have an annual fund goal, but while we bring in gifts for acquisition fund, endowment, and the exhibition fund, we don't know what those are going to bring in each year. So we don't carry them on the budget. We hope that we're going to get something, but we may not get endowment dollars every year. So it's not healthy to budget for it. We compare, we use the numbers that we get from our CFO to tie out. And I think that's really important. We'll talk about that in a minute, that our numbers in the development office tie out with the numbers in the finance office at the end of every month. So you'll see that we're at, 229, just about 230 against our 275 goal for the annual fund as of October 31. We break that down further in the category below by membership dues. And we made a choice this year to break out our higher level donors in the president circle and the director circle. So you see that there's no comparison. I do a little bit of an advance just to hold my feet to the fire. So you'll see that's why we're comparing October to mid-November. But you'll also see that there's no comparison. So it's going to show us a little bit ahead. And so this is one of the metrics that we use, that we choose to report on and share rather publicly through the board and internally as well. And then I think the really important one of the really important numbers that members of your board who may be more finance oriented or who may come from the finance world or the business world look for is the return on investment. I was at a previous institution, and when I first came on, the ROI wasn't very good. So there was a board member who kept pushing and saying, let's just close the whole shop, send 2 letters out a year, and we'll get a better return on our investment. Now, I don't think that's true, because you lose all of the humanity and all of the cultivation, all of the spirit, all of the stewardship that goes into really good development work. But I want to go back. If we look at under FY20, you'll see on the first yellow highlighted line, as of October 31st, 2020, not including gifts in kind, we had brought in just about 1.14 million in cash contributed revenue. If you're looking for an ROI or a way to justify your existence, or a way to explain an increase in budget or decrease in budget, or really to just get a sense of where you are compared to peer organizations, taking budgeted revenue over budgeted expenses will give you that ROI number. So for every dollar invested or dollar budgeted by the institution for your office, what are you going to return? So when we break that out, our office has spent just over $248,000 this year. So when you take those numbers, we've got a $4.60 return for every dollar invested in the development office. I'll take that. That's better than the stock market. Way better. So I'll take it. And if you want to flip the script and just flip the way that the numbers are crunched, what's your cost to raise a dollar? So not now your return on investment, but what's your cost to raise a dollar? So just flip the way the numbers are used. And right now we've got 21 cents to raise a dollar. The Better Business Bureau recommends 30 cents for nonprofit organizations and fundraising organizations. Most educational institutions run at about 20 cents if they're really lean and really good. So anywhere between 20 and 30 cents, if you can figure that out for your organization, you're in really, really good company. It's also interesting and important to note what we include in our expenses. And so that's everything from compensation, FICA, taxes, benefits, postage, communication, print, design, labor and food, and all event-related expenses. It's everything short of administrative costs and sort of technology. We don't count the cost of a new computer in the development office or every ream of paper that comes through. That's just cost to run the organization. But those are the important expenses that we count when we're trying to figure out our budgeted revenue. So where to begin? And so we've got some metrics. We figured out an ROI and a cost to raise $1, but how do we get to where we need to be going to even figure some of those things out? And the first step, and admittedly, when I first came in here, there were some places where this fell flat, was that every single gift that comes into your institution should be assigned a campaign, a fund, and an appeal. And whether you use Razor's Edge or Generations or Salesforce or any other CRM, there should be a place for you to input a campaign, a fund, and an appeal. Campaign is sort of the umbrella, right? And that can change year to year unless you're in a multi-year campaign. The fund is always going to stay consistent year to year. That's just going to be run on a fiscal year. So you're always going to have an annual fund. You'll always have an endowment fund. You'll always have an exhibition fund. And how you pull those numbers and what campaign they go under may change year to year. The appeal is where it gets a little bit more interesting and requires some different thought when trying to explain it and show it to board members, is that the appeal is how the dollars are coming in. So somebody could hand you an annual fund check at your admissions front gate. Somebody could hand it to you during a visit. Somebody could mail it as part of a fall mailing, a spring solicitation. It really is up to you and your organization how far down you want to drill to find out how those dollars are coming in. And that's really up to you. Again, this is where working with our CFO comes in to make sure that we're tying out funds and that they actually exist on the ledger account, and that you want to work with your CFO to make sure that you're communicating with them about what the auditors are looking for, what they're going to want to see, what controls, record maintenance, and retention policy you have. And my personal feeling are gone are the days of paper file folders. As much as you can, scan, so that those letters, those check copies, everything that's permissible to be in a scanned cloud area, feel free to load it up. The last part that I think is really important is to treat your donors as you want to be treated. Make sure that you're looking at them as, if I got this letter, how would I respond? More importantly, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. For many of us, we may have an older constituency group. I think about it as, how would my grandmother respond or my parents respond to receiving this solicitation? Does it resonate with not only myself and my family and my kids, if it's talking about education and programming, but does it resonate with them as well? When we talk about working with your executive director and campaigns and major gifts, this is assuming you've gone through a feasibility study. If you want to have gone through a feasibility study, I think you're going to need to go through a feasibility study. But you've determined a timeline. You've determined from your weekly conversations, from working with the CFO, from working to 18 to 24 months in advance, what your timeline is, what your priorities are, and is it a comprehensive campaign or is it a capital campaign? Are we continuing to raise money for the annual fund separately from bricks and mortar, or are we combining everything in? Are we counting plan giving as gravy at a discounted rate, or are we not? So make sure that you're working with your ED, your CFO, your board, and your campaign cabinet to make those determinations. And then when Becky and I came in, we're both big fans of process and procedure. So making sure that we had both a statement of understanding and a pledge agreement when we went to donors for either pledges or for naming opportunities was really important to us. So I wanted to share just what our statement of understanding template looks like. You know, it talks about the purpose of the fund. It talks about the administration by the trustees. It talks about the donor's intent for funding and the agreement with the museum. My favorite part, it talks about the naming rights and what happens if you know, there's any sort of malfeasance or any sort of reason that we'd have to revoke the naming of a fund or a building. You know, it's important, obviously, to have all this reviewed by council as well. Both this statement of understanding and this document, which is our pledge agreement, auditors love to see. They're going to want to see them because it makes sure that the museum, the institution, the development office, the ED are honoring the donor's intent, and that the dollars are going where they should be going for to honor the donor's intent. This is not self-serving. It's not selfish on my part. It is really a letter. Our form letter is a letter directed back to me, addressed back to me, as though the donor was signing it and dating it and writing it themselves. We've provided the script for them, but obviously we work with them on putting this together. And you know, when they're all in the room with us, we sign it back. I've been told to give it a hustle, so we're trying to move through here.
That was me. It was me that told him to give it a hustle.
so further internal communications. You know, I think that it's really important to remember that good development is not siloed. It's not just focused on raising money, annual fund cash, bringing dollars in the door, you know, boosting your membership numbers, because all of that affects everything else. And your colleagues help you do your job at the end of the day. And especially for museums or organizations or shops that may be a little bit smaller, where you're wearing all these hats as membership director and development director and maybe ED and maybe cure, I don't know. You know, you're the be all end all. And so how can I help visitors services fulfill their mission? It's all development. We are developing relationships, potential, and opportunities. Our board has a committee specifically for development. And before, it was solely focused on just annual fund dollars and solicitations. They met 5 times a year and held 2 signing sessions. Each of our board members signs the letters of friends they know or people they've met at receptions, etc. We've switched the priority of the development committee. They still do that, but now it's a much larger picture, 30,000-foot view of annual fund, of events, membership, larger topics like engagement and new audiences. We work together with Becky as executive director, our board president, and the chair of our development committee to hone priorities for the year that we're going to want to focus on. Pandemic was never one that we saw coming, so obviously things shift and change, but there's definitely work that you can do even in off years. My last point is, you know, goes back to, but what if you're an office of one? I'd suggest that you start with your 2 priorities: proper documentation for gifts and pledges, because that allows you to go have something to go back to, and then figure out what best practices and what metrics you want to be reporting on. What makes your case with your ED the strongest that it possibly can be when you present to your board and when you're having those conversations. Also, really use the development committee you have, the volunteers you have who are interested in development or fundraising or membership, and put them to work. Let them be the workhorse committee for you. Let them sign letters, let them stuff envelopes, let them solicit for you. It doesn't have to just rest on your shoulders. You know, play quarterback and put the game plan together, but trust in your volunteers and in your committee members that they're going to be able to go off and do some of that work for you and with you. Keep your CFO happy. I mean, we've touched on this quite a bit already, but somebody told me a long time ago that, you know, the CFO and the director of development speak the same language, but it's different dialects. You know, I think that that's really true. There are times when the development numbers are going to be ahead over the ledger numbers. And there are things that we're going to be reporting that haven't been booked or carried as a pledge yet. And that's okay. You've just got to come to an understanding and have kumbaya with your CFO that you're both on the same page and you know that things are going to tie out. Have those hard conversations about what tying out looks like. They're uncomfortable. They can be uncomfortable, but make sure that you're having them, because do you want to tie out once a month, once a quarter, or once a year? And trust me, you don't want to tie out once a year. That is darn near impossible. So better to find the hiccups earlier at tying out once a month than at the end of the year. And then our CFO is intimately involved in the grants application process, obviously. So making sure that we've got their support as we move through and negotiate grant applications. I may let you read this, but I may skip over this. You know, just to talk about that. Really, I have this slide in here because all of the things that we've talked about previous to this, with sharing mission and vision with your ED, making sure that you're working on a necessity or a desire. Is it annual fund? Is it budget relieving or budget enhancing? Are you trying to free up unrestricted cash? And I'd love, Becky, maybe for you to give some thoughts here just on you know, something that you and I are really passionate about, which is don't just apply to apply. No, do not look at what may be low-hanging fruit. EDs, maybe you get something in your inbox that you say, ooh, this is in a stretch if I don't look too closely related to things we've been talking about. I'm going to forward it on to my DOD and say, hey, let's do it. Doesn't matter if it's tangential, doesn't matter if it's unstrategic or only mission, you know, kind of, here's your mission, here it is over there. Hey, I see the opportunity for us to get in with a new organization that I know gives out major grants. Who cares if the deadline for application is next week? No. And I'm saying this to all the directors that are here that may be in a position that is one that I appreciate, where you are one of delegation, where you are able to see a great idea and share it with others on your team to execute, and then you get to circle back. If you think it is too much and you recognize it is too much beyond staff capacity, it is not mission relevant, it's a term of a turnaround that is too quick for you to do a good job, do not burden your team with the opportunity. If you send it to them, they will consider it their charge to do it as a directive from you. Do not put them in that position. Be reasonable with the opportunities that come your way. Make sure that you are embracing new and innovative ideas without overstating your scale or your staff bandwidth. I'm done with my soapbox, but I think that's really important for everyone to always keep in mind. it's a great soapbox and one that I greatly appreciate. So wrap up. This was fun. I love this. But is your executive director a fundraiser with you? Do they have fun doing this? Do you have, think about things like when you sit down with a donor, do you have a routine? Do you have a dog and pony show? Do you know who's going to hand off to who and say what? And when you ask for money, what's the repartee? What's the give and take? I took it out of here because it was weird, but I'm going to say it. Like this relationship, there's so much collaboration and communication that it's like a really good platonic marriage. That it's really about just being brutally honest and having difficult conversations. Making sure that you're on the same page and disagreeing and saying, I don't think that that's a priority, or Becky, I can't fund that, or I know the donor isn't going to want to do that, or having her push back and say, tough nugs, go ask, and that's okay too. So, collaboration and communication is key. Think a lot about best practices. What is best practice? Industry-wide, there's a lot of resources out there, but what is also best practice for you? What's going to save your sanity and get you there? Document. What's important for you is, do your auditors want, time-stamped and dated checks and postmarked envelopes, or do they not care? Yes, it's head and heart. It's head and heart, but the metrics, don't forget, take the heart out of it, and they let the numbers speak for themselves in the best of ways or the worst of ways. But the numbers are what they are. You can't fight them. And when you know what the truth is through those numbers, it allows you and your ED to do a better job together, and that's the most important part. So with that, I have exhausted all of you by going far too quickly with way too much information in 43 minutes.
Woo!
Here's my contact information. Becky's available as well. Being on the board, I'm sure that she's able to share contact information. And Rainey, I think that we're ready to defer to you with any questions that have come from Huva.
Great. We do have a couple of questions that have come up so far, and I would encourage people, as you have the time here, to put a few more into the question and answer section of Huva. But the first is, will there be examples of the statement of understanding and the pledge agreement available to participants that you shared earlier in the in your presentation?
Yeah, so I can answer that for us, Matt. So we're very happy to share with NEMA, as has been done in past years, this PowerPoint for review. I'm not sure exactly all the formats with our unusual way of handling the conference this year, but if you want to take Matt's contact info down or reach out to me, I'm Becky@flowgriz.org. We're more than happy to share with you the sample documents for your review.
Great.
They're not classified. They're not top secret. We can share.
Excellent. Thank you. And then another question regarding return on investment. If an organization presents at a conference as part of its mission, should this also be considered a fundraising event? I served many years ago on a board where most folks insisted it should only break even or just barely exceed our costs so that the registration was less expensive, as opposed to getting sponsorships to fund most of the expense and use registration as fundraising.
I don't love that. I would think it's a value proposition, that the idea of depressing registrations because you don't want to go to solicit fundraisers in the form of sponsorships doesn't seem like the right idea for me. I would also offer that if it's something where a good or services is offered and a fee is paid, that's an earned revenue. That is not actually a development activity. So if it's something where, like our conference here, this is not our contribution to NEMA, we're signing up for a conference and receiving professional development. That said, we do, of course, all of us host fundraising events, many of whom are receiving donations, receiving obviously payment for invitations, and then sponsorships as well. So I would say that the idea of suspending raising prices on something because you don't want to grow the pool of fundraisers is a self-defeating act, both in terms of anticipating that at some point you're going to raise those costs, and rather than the smoothing effect of doing it with a subtle escalation over years, you're going to eventually need to jump up when the costs require an increase in the fee structure. And then I would also say that it's why turn down any opportunity where you are providing something of value and not seeking more stakeholders to support it?
Right.
Matt, what would you say?
What you said. No, I think I think we are of the similar thought. I think that rather than I would caution against that, because eventually it seems like the cost is going to have to go up, and you're going to have to raise and having those. It's more of a cultivation and stewardship opportunity than it is I think a development opportunity. That makes sense.
Great. How do you make decisions about what donor database software to choose? If that's by a committee or individuals, for museums without an IT department, or with IT consultant help?
Okay, this is a very timely question. I almost wonder if this is a plant. So
this is Emily Robertson.
Okay, I don't know Emily Robertson. Thank you for asking this wonderful question, though, Emily, because I can tell you our really unique path and story. So we, at the museum here, we have identified the fact that we can't continue to operate with our band-aided systems. So we've got a visitor services system. We've got Generations, which is in resonance, and we've got Embark, and we've got a few other systems that are piecemealed together and they don't talk to, and we've got Financial Edge from Razor's Edge. So nothing talks to each other. So our board president and Becky sat down earlier this year and they said, this is ridiculous. What are we going to do about this? And I was lucky enough to head up part of a task force of staff members that represented different interests among different departments. And we interviewed 3 different firms and have the recommendation to the board to move forward with one. So our process was that we interviewed 3 different firms, heard the presentations, got the proposals, asked questions, went back and forth, had as much time as we needed, settled on one, got a final proposal after negotiation, and in December we'll present that to our board for approval. Now, what I'll say is that in the interim, that allowed us the opportunity to go to key board members and stakeholders and folks who really get the internal workings of an organization like ours and say, listen, guys, this is going to cost us X amount of dollars in our first year. It's really heavy in the first year. It lays off in years 2 and 3. We need help. Will you help us defray the cost? And to our surprise, and much to our pleasure, we were able to raise enough to completely negate and defray any cost to us, to the museum, for the first year. So 2021 is completely paid for by donors, and that's a restricted gift. And then we will begin budgeting and incurring costs for 2022 and 2023. Way too long an answer to that question, but yes.
No, but Emily, we'll believe that you're a real person, but this, as Matt said, is uncannily on point for us right now. And just at a larger point too, when we're talking about governance versus management, because this is an operational need, it really is going through your staff, and the small group that Matt referred to were representatives of different staff groups that would be working with software who were involved in making the choice. But in terms of any new expense, like a new contract would have a new expense for the organization, that's what goes to the board for a vote. So that's why we wanted that to go through our board without too many questions. And so we sought funding so that it would be an easier fall to bring in something new on the operational side.
Great. This is going to sound like a planted question as well. My board needs some fundamental nonprofit financial education, how to read financial reports, audited statements, etc. Any suggestions for good speakers or resources?
Rainey, why do you say that that's a plan? I don't understand.
Well, I think it's a perfect opportunity to reference your work.
Well, you offered that. I didn't jump on it, but I would say that if I were not the one speaking right now and you were talking to one of my colleagues at NEMA, there may be a chance that they would mention my name as somebody who typically leads an introduction to financial management session or a budget 101 session and teaches on intro to nonprofit finance for AASLH. I do have a book that is out if you would like to take a look. It's called Financial Fundamentals for Historic House Museums. It was published in 2017 by Roman and Littlefield. If we had the opportunity, I'll be gathering for NEMA. It would be for sale at the NEMA bookstore. And that may be just a great introductory text to take a look at with your board. And if you would like to follow up, I can recommend my course or speaking. So give me a heads up if you'd like to about that. But man, people are really hitting our hot zones. I like it.
You're gonna walk away feeling good. I'm a shop of one at the moment, doing everything from grant writing and events to membership and annual appeal. The one thing that I have not done much of is major gifts, which is so important right now. I have a direct relationship with my ED, but she is reluctant to formalize the portfolio process for both of us and the board. How do I carefully steer her and the development committee in that direction?
I'll leave that to you, Matt.
Yeah. How do you carefully steer that? Boy, I'm going to say that the best, we're going to take the heart out of it, Go to metrics. Show why, create a case for yourself, pivot the numbers so that you can show why your need for major gifts is so great right now. It's probably right here in your face and you see it, and they may be catching some light off of it as well. But take the heart out of it, show the case for metrics. And then the question that you're asking is sort of a revision of portfolios and relationship managers and really doing the work around that. That's a much more difficult question and one that has to be done a little more tactfully. But I think that the metrics is the key to opening that door up, or would be for me anyway, to be able to go into your board and your ED and say, you know, we're only able to do this. We need these major gifts. Here's these folks that have the potential to be able to offer that sort of help. And again, maybe this is where we have brutally honest conversations of who's managing the relationship. How are we going to ask? How are we going to get to the third or fourth visit or second or third visit to ask for the gift? Who's strategizing? Who's leading us there?
I think that's a really good response. And the only thing that I would add is internally, to get the momentum build up? Because it sounds like you're looking at both development committee and looking at your ED and saying, oh my gosh, I'm kind of looking at, this mountain I have to climb in terms of getting everyone on the same page. Start one foot in front of the other. Do you have a really great ally in your development committee chair? No. Do you have a good ally in your executive director position? Who do you think you could have a good come to Jesus moment with and say, this is something that's necessary for us to work most effectively? And then whomever you can get on board, go then to that third person and then go to the committee. But my thought is that you're probably going to want to seek out at least one ally out of this kind of tripod that you're talking about and see how you can continue a line of successive education, because that's what you're going to have to deal with. But don't look at it as one and done. Look at it with what Matt is saying, and then look at kind of who you can educate about where you need to be going, and these are the ways to get there.
And I'll say that it'll happen if you get one major gift. The proof then is in the pudding, because you've done the work. You've got the ally, you've gone through the steps, you've gotten the major gift, and now the ball is going to roll, because people their eyes are going to be open and they're going to say, wow, okay, that's the kind of transformative gift that can begin to happen. And that's what means, what we can really begin to use a lot more of. How did you do that? And that'll sort of help your case. So one foot in front of the other. I love that, Becky. And then get that first gift and it'll start to roll.
Yep.
Last question we have says, can you talk a little bit about your fall appeal?
Sure. Yeah. So our fall appeal, we are just as a heads up, our fiscal year runs calendar year. So we're January to December. We do an annual fund appeal, a very, very light annual fund sort of thank you appeal in the early spring, sort of March-ish. And then we do an appeal in late spring in June, July. That letter, so the very light appeal is much more of a cultivation stewardship thank you letter that comes from Becky or myself, or perhaps our development chair. The letter this year was unique for springtime, because we were in the middle of the pandemic and we were closed. So that would have typically been a time when our development committee would have descended upon our office building and our conference room, signed letters, and sent everything out. Becky, everything went out over Becky's signature this year, and really was sort of we're grateful that you're still here, we're still here sort of message. We then sent out an appeal in October, realizing for the annual fund, realizing that we were operating at a projected 20% deficit. And we asked folks who gave last year, so Libunts, to increase their giving, to consider increase their giving by 20% to help meet that deficit, which is not an extraordinary number, an extraordinary request for an increase. And then December will be a letter from myself and the board chair, just asking for, the general sort of any amount, any support. And we are going to go back to folks that already gave earlier this year with a very gentle thank you letter, but if you can do again letter in December. Does that answer your question? I know you specifically asked about the spring appeal, but that's fall appeal, excuse me. So that's what we did. Our fall appeal asked for 20% more, and we had a very good response. We had a lot of folks who increased by 20%. We also had a lot of folks who were members for 10, 12 years, hadn't ever given to the annual fund, gave this year. We had a lot of lapsed donors who had missed 4, 5, 7 years and gave again this year. So the message was heard.
Well, that takes us through all of our questions and all of our time. So thank you both very much. There were some compliments for your session and some gratitude in the comments as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for helping us, Rainey. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please do not hesitate to reach out to Matt or to reach out to me if there are any additional questions that you require some clarity on or didn't occur to you in this hour together. We're always here to help our colleagues. So on that note, Matt, I think we're all set. Time to sign off.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.